It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seems to slow down and the sounds of the city fade into the background. A peaceful neighborhood nestled in the heart of a bustling city, where families lived their lives and dreams in harmony. But on one street, in one particular house, that peace would be shattered in a way no one could ever have imagined. A group of men, fueled by nothing but hate, stood outside the modest home of a woman they didn't know and had no reason to attack. They had no idea who lived there or the kind of life she led, but to them, it didn't matter. Their intentions were clear: destroy what they couldn't understand. And so, under the cover of darkness, they made their move. They smashed windows, kicked in doors, and left a trail of destruction that would have been enough to break most people. But this wasn't just any woman's house. This wasn't someone who could be easily broken. Inside, a woman sat in the dim light, her eyes scanning the news on her phone, her mind lost in thought. To anyone who didn't know her, she was just another person, going about her day. But to those who crossed her path, she was something else entirely. Her name was Maya Daniels, and she wasn't someone you messed with. Maya wasn't just a woman living her life. She was a force to be reckoned with. A former Special Forces operative, her training had shaped her into someone who could take on the world and come out on top. But no one knew that. No one knew the depths of her past, the things she had done, and the dangers she had faced. To the outside world, she was just an ordinary woman, working a regular job and keeping to herself. But in the shadows, there was more to her than anyone could imagine. As the first of the vandals made his way up the steps, Maya stood up from her seat, her movements calm and calculated. She heard the crunch of glass underfoot as the men kicked open her front door. The first thought that crossed her mind wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, it was clarity. These men had made a mistake. They had no idea who they were dealing with. With a sense of purpose, Maya walked toward the door, her steps steady. She wasn't afraid. She didn't need to be. She had survived things most people couldn't even comprehend. War zones, high-stakes missions, and life-or-death situations had taught her one thing above all else: never let the enemy know what you're capable of until it's too late. The door creaked open, and the first man stepped into the house, a crowbar in his hand. His eyes scanned the room, expecting to see a broken woman, someone who would cower in fear. Instead, his gaze locked onto Maya, standing in the doorway, a quiet defiance in her eyes. "What are you doing in my house?" Maya's voice was steady calm. There was no tremble, no hesitation, just cold, unwavering confidence. The man's eyes narrowed, a sneer forming on his lips. "We're teaching you a lesson, lady. You don't belong here." Maya's gaze never wavered. "I belong exactly where I am. But you've made a grave mistake." Before the man could react, Maya moved with a speed that was almost impossible to follow. In one swift motion, she disarmed him, taking the crowbar from his hands and using it to shove him back. He stumbled, shocked by the force of her action. But Maya wasn't done. She advanced, each movement precise, deliberate, trained. She wasn't just defending herself, she was sending a message. The other men, realizing they were no longer in control, rushed into the house, shouting at each other in confusion. But Maya had already anticipated their every move. They were predictable, following a pattern she knew well. As they charged toward her, Maya dropped low, sweeping their legs out from under them with a practiced grace. One by one, the men hit the floor, their attempts at aggression turning into desperation. But still, Maya didn't stop. She moved with the grace of a predator, her every action calculated to disable, to neutralize, to incapacitate. These men had come to destroy her life, but they had no idea that she was the one who would become their worst nightmare. It didn't take long for the group to realize that they were in over their heads. Fear began to creep into their voices as they struggled to get up, but Maya was always 2 steps ahead. She had turned the tables on them, and now they were the ones on the defensive. "What the hell is wrong with you?" One of the men gasped as he crawled across the floor, trying to escape. "Who are you?" Maya stood over him, her face an emotionless mask. "I'm the one who's going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." But just as she prepared to take the final step and end the confrontation, a loud noise echoed from outside. It was the unmistakable sound of sirens. The police. Maya knew that she needed to finish this quickly before things escalated further. But just as she took another step forward, she heard the distinct sound of more footsteps approaching from the back of the house. It wasn't just the men who had come to destroy her life. They had brought reinforcements. Maya paused, her instincts kicking into overdrive. The situation had just become much more complicated. She wasn't just dealing with a few angry men anymore. There was an entire group of people out there who had no idea who they were about to face. As the door creaked open and more shadows entered the house, Maya had a choice to make: fight her way out or stay and take them all down. But one thing was certain: the fight for her life had just begun, and the men who thought they were in control had no idea what they had unleashed. Maya stood still in the middle of the room, her senses hyper-alert. She could hear the men moving in the back of the house, but she couldn't make out exactly where they were. The sirens were getting louder, echoing off the streets. The police were close, but they wouldn't be able to get here in time to stop what was coming. Maya knew that. She had been trained for moments like this, when the world seemed to close in on you and every decision mattered. She could feel the sweat running down her back, but it wasn't fear that made her pulse race. It was anticipation. Maya had faced danger countless times, both in the field and in her personal life. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was about something more, something personal. The men outside hadn't come here just to cause chaos. They had targeted her specifically, and that meant they knew something about her. But what? How had they found out who she really was? She had been so careful, so meticulous, keeping her past buried deep beneath the surface. No one knew. No one was supposed to know. Maya glanced at the shattered remnants of her front door, her mind working through the possibilities. These men weren't ordinary thugs. They were organized, coordinated. They had weapons, and they had numbers. That meant they had resources. Resources that could only come from someone who had been watching her for a long time. Someone with a score to settle. Her mind flashed back to her time in the Special Forces. She had always kept her distance, never allowing herself to get too close to anyone, never letting anyone into her world. The weight of her past was something she carried alone, a burden she had learned to live with. But now it seemed like that past was coming back to haunt her in ways she couldn't have predicted. The footsteps grew louder, the sound of boots hitting the floor growing closer. Maya's training kicked in, and she took a deep breath, focusing her energy. She couldn't let them get the upper hand again, not after what had just happened. The men who had come in first were still on the ground, nursing their wounds, but the new threat was unpredictable. She needed information. She needed answers. Suddenly, a voice broke through the tension. It wasn't one of the men from outside. It was deeper, calmer, with a cold edge that sent a chill down her spine. Maya Daniels, the voice called out, firm and almost mocking. I should've known. The quiet woman, living alone. Too good to be true. Maya's stomach tightened. She didn't recognize the voice, but the way it spoke her name sent a wave of unease through her. They knew her name. They knew who she was. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall, dressed in black, his features hidden by the low light, but there was something about him that made her instincts flare. He wasn't like the others. This man was different, more dangerous. You've made a serious mistake, Maya said, her voice steady though her pulse was racing. She didn't move, keeping her position, waiting for him to make the first move. The man smiled, a cruel, knowing grin. No, Maya, the mistake was yours. You thought you could hide forever, that no one would find out what you've done. But you're wrong. We've known about you for a long time. Maya's mind reeled. How could they have known? She had erased every trace of her past. She had made sure of that. But somehow they had figured it out. Whoever they were relentless. And now they were standing in her home, with the upper hand. Your Special Forces, the man continued, his voice a low growl. The best of the best, but that doesn't mean anything here. Not anymore. Maya's hand instinctively moved to the knife strapped to her side. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was enough. She knew what he was saying. They weren't just after her for revenge. They were after something much bigger. And whatever it was, it couldn't end here. Not like this. The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. His gaze flicked to the men on the ground, still struggling to rise, then back to Maya. You think you can take all of us down? You think you're still in control? He laughed, the sound dark and mocking. You're outnumbered, outgunned. You're nothing but a relic of the past. Maya's hand tightened around the hilt of the knife, her grip steady despite the tension building in her chest. Outgunned. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. She wasn't just a relic. She was a survivor. And survivors didn't go down without a fight. You don't know who you're dealing with, Maya said, her voice low but fierce. You've made a mistake. A big one. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced toward the other men, who were beginning to stir, their groans of pain filling the room. He waited, letting the moment stretch out before he spoke again. You're right. I don't know everything about you, Maya, but I'm about to, and you're going to regret ever crossing me. Maya felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She didn't know who this man was, but she could feel the danger radiating off of him. He wasn't just some random thug. He had a plan. He was one step ahead of her. The sirens outside grew louder, closer now. The police were near, but Maya knew they wouldn't be able to stop what was coming. Not without help. Not without someone who understood the stakes. As the man began to approach her, Maya's mind raced. She could fight. She could take them all down. But there were too many of them. And now, with the police about to arrive, she had to make a decision. Did she keep fighting? Or did she escape and regroup? Either way, she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The man's voice cut through her thoughts. You should have stayed hidden, Maya. Now you'll pay the price. The tension in the room was palpable. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the man moved closer, his eyes locked onto hers. She could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air, thick with the promise of something big about to happen. And then, without warning, the door behind the man flew open, and another figure stepped into the room. Maya's eyes widened as she saw the face of the person she least expected to find here. It was someone from her past, someone who had disappeared years ago. And they were here, right now, in her house. Maya's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure standing in the doorway. The man was tall, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but there was no mistaking the cold eyes staring back at her. Those eyes had haunted her for years, and now they were staring right into hers as if nothing had changed. Jason, she whispered under her breath, her voice barely a sound. Jason Hale. The last person she ever expected to see again. He had been her partner in the Special Forces, back before everything went wrong. He had disappeared without a trace, leaving Maya to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had thought he was dead, just another casualty of a mission gone south. But now, here he was, standing in her home, a ghost from her past. The man standing across from Maya seemed to notice the change in her expression, a smirk curling on his lips. I see you two have a history, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. But that's not important right now. What matters is that you're both going to regret this. Jason took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Maya's. For a moment, there was only silence between them, a heavy, charged silence. Maya's mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. How had Jason survived? Why was he here? And why had he come with these people? She had trusted him once, but now she wasn't so sure. You're still alive, Maya said, her voice steady, though her insides were in turmoil. I thought you were dead. Jason's gaze softened for just a second, but his expression quickly returned to its cold, calculating demeanor. You don't know the half of it. But I'm not here for a reunion, Maya. I'm here because you made a choice. And now it's time for you to pay the price. The tension in the room was palpable. Maya's pulse quickened, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet, she had to think. Jason had always been a mystery, even when they had been partners. He was good, too good, and she had always wondered just how much he had been hiding. Now she realized that whatever secrets he had kept from her, they were bigger than she had ever imagined. The man who had been mocking her earlier stepped forward, standing beside Jason. I think it's time we show you what happens when you cross the wrong people, Maya. Maya's eyes flicked between Jason and the man. She had no idea who the man was, but he was clearly in charge. He had the kind of authority that Maya recognized immediately. The kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. The kind of person who had power and knew how to use it. Maya's mind was racing. She needed to get out of here. She couldn't take on this many people, not with Jason involved. But the police were closing in, and as she ran now, they'd have her cornered. She couldn't let them escape. Not after everything they had done. Why are you doing this? Maya asked, her voice steady though her mind was whirling. What do you want from me? Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he took another step forward, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the wreckage of her home. We want you to understand something, he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. You made a choice when you left. You walked away from everything we worked for, and now you need to face the consequences. Maya's stomach twisted as she realized what he was implying. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something much bigger, something that went beyond her and Jason, beyond anything she had ever done in her career. She had walked away from a mission that had been covered up, a mission that had failed, and somehow it had come back to haunt her. The man next to Jason spoke again, his voice dripping with venom. You may think you're untouchable, Maya. You may think your past doesn't matter anymore, but you're wrong. It's only just begun. Maya clenched her fists at her sides, trying to maintain control. She could feel the weight of their words pressing down on her, but she refused to let them see her crack. She had fought too hard, been through too much to let them break her now. "You don't know what you're up against," Maya said, her voice low, dangerous. "You think you can scare me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Jason's cold eyes met hers, and for a moment, it felt as if the world had stopped. The room was silent, except for the sound of the sirens growing louder outside. But Maya could feel it. Feel the tension between them, the unspoken history, the unresolved anger. She had no idea what had happened to Jason after he disappeared, but she could tell that whatever it was, it had changed him. He wasn't the man she used to know. He was something else now, something darker. "You haven't changed, have you?" Maya said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Still hiding behind your mission, your orders, never questioning anything, never thinking for yourself." Jason's expression didn't falter. "You're wrong, Maya. I changed. I've seen things you couldn't even begin to understand. Things that have made me realize what's truly important. And it's not you. It's not your little life here. It's the bigger picture. The mission." Maya's heart sank as she realized the depth of the web they had been caught in. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much more dangerous, something that could threaten everything she had worked for. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, suffocating her. But she couldn't afford to back down. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. "You're still playing their game," Maya said softly, almost to herself. "And you want me to play along?" Jason didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't here to reconcile. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here because he had a job to do, and that job involved her. The man beside Jason stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "Maya, you don't understand. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than your little rebellion. You thought you could run away, but you can't. Not anymore." Maya's mind raced. She needed to think quickly, but the pieces were still out of reach. She couldn't see the full picture yet. All she knew was that these men, Jason, the man beside him, were part of something much larger. Something that had been lurking in the shadows, and now it was dragging her back in. As the sirens grew louder, Maya knew that time was running out. She had to make a choice. Fight or run. But what if running meant walking straight into their trap? What if staying meant sealing her fate? The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest as the door to her past swung wide open, and the shadows she had buried for so long began to close in on her once again.